We're back to it. It is the Sheldon MacLeod Show here on News 95.7. Everything I said about a talk show host earlier, forget about it. Sorry, we weren't supposed to be talking about that, so just erase that from your memory banks. That's the kind of show we roll here with. Hey, producer Matt.
I thought, we could send in resumes for your job.
Sure, yeah, why not?
Didn't you say you were retiring?
I am independently wealthy. No, wait, I'm just independently. Andrew Younger's in our studio, and Andrew Younger has been, running. You have been very active on social media talking about these. You're running half marathons, 10Ks. You're a busy dude.
Well, I haven't done any half marathons yet. I might have done
right.
10s and 5s and 15s.
But can you juggle and jog at the
I
same
cannot.
time?
Michael Bergeron, it's amazing to see him, and he's fast too. To see him go by, he just got married too. And if
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah,
Congratulations, Mike.
those who are out there, NS Jogler is the Instagram handle, and you should check it. You put some of his wedding photos on there. There are some pretty cool wedding photos.
Was he juggling cake knives or something?
He was not. He was jumping. Although there is a video online of him juggling.
He said he used to do
juggling
machetes.
He did it at a track
parties.
in PEI. And there's another guy, I don't know what it is with Nova Scotians and juggling, because there's a guy online now who juggles chainsaws, who's a magician.
From Truro.
Yeah.
I'll think of his name in a moment, but he's a very he was on David Letterman show.
Yeah, so I mean, I've been doing a lot of it. I'm going up to Cape Breton this weekend. I'm actually going up to do some shooting on a television show, but there is also the Fiddler Cape Breton Fiddler race in Sydney, so I'll do that. Part of it, I mean, the reason I share it is I have a lot of followers, fortunately, and some of them are runners. But Run Nova Scotia is a volunteer board that does a heck of a lot of work around the province.
You're an influencer.
No, I'm not an influencer, but Run Nova Scotia and the volunteer board members do a heck of a lot of work. They put these things on. There's volunteer race directors all over the province. A lot of these events, like, you look at the ones down in Bridgewater, right? Mm-hmm. The Michelin Tire Trot and things that bring people into these communities, and they spend money, and it's not millions of dollars coming into the community, but I think these are important. They're great ways to keep people active. You see people out there who are walking it, there's an over 80 category in these races.
That's
right?
Wild.
And you see them doing it. So I think it's good for a whole lot of reasons. So, I mean, anything I can do and others can do to help promote it. I'm never going to be the fastest person in the world, but it's a way to, it's a physical activity I can do anywhere I am in the world.
Yeah, if I was ever going to race, if I was ever going to run a race, it would be the Lunenburg 5K road race and muffin run.
Oh, yeah. So they changed the date of that next year, what I hear.
Oh, okay.
So it might be a bit earlier in the season, because a lot of things got juggled around because of the Blue Nose change. Mm-hmm. And I think I was hearing a rumor the other day that might be a bit earlier. So you should do that. I've never done it, but I would like to do it.
I would just do it for the muffin.
Well, why not? That's why a lot of people.
Top for the muffin.
Do you not understand that a lot of people run races so they can get the chocolate milk at the end of the race?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the whole point of running, isn't it?
I did. I helped out with the triathlon. We are going to talk about politics in a second. Triathlon, when they were doing that in Dartmouth, and and some of the people that were involved with that, and they said, you know what? Nothing tastes any better than the beer and pizza you get after.
It's amazing.
Swim. What is it? 10K, bike 100, and then run a half marathon.
Yeah. So so it's swim 3K, bike 160 or 180. Someone's going to correct me on that, I'm sure. Yeah. And then it's a full marathon that you run for the iron distance. But just my quick point, and this ties in with politics, is the reason that race does not happen in Dartmouth now is because it is so expensive in Nova Scotia to put on races, and particularly expensive in HRM compared to other places in the province because of what the city charges for the policing and the requirements they put on the policing. And one of the things that I had done when I was still in the legislature was put in a bill that maybe the government will consider in their new Traffic Safety Act, which was to allow certified traffic control professionals to do some of the traffic control at these big events, because it's an enormous cost. And really with Epic, for example, they just couldn't afford to keep losing money. So now that event still exists. It's one of the largest Canada Day races in the country now, in Dartmouth, right around the lakes. However, it's expensive. And the same with Soul Sisters. Soul Sisters is out there and promoting women getting active, and they obviously Girls Gone Gazelle for the younger girls. And that's really, really important. Mm-hmm. But I can tell you, because I volunteer on that event, it is a struggle with the costs that they hit. And it's something, if we want people to get active, there's an easy thing to help with.
How much are you going to want to spend in order to participate? I mean, if you can't get it
that's
all
right.
back from entrance fee.
No, you can't, and it's hard to get sponsors these days. And outside of HRM, the municipalities are much, much more supportive in terms of in-kind support and everything.
Andrew Younger's in our studio. He's a former MLA. He sat in the House as an independent. Before that, he was a member of government. He spent a bit of time involved around the political scene. He's also been a municipal politician. What haven't you done?
I've done a few things, yeah.
When we learned that the House was going back into session in the first week of September after Labor Day, and I read a few people who were commenting that they couldn't recall a time where it was this early. And maybe it has been, but not in recent memory.
It may have gone in this early when we've had a summer election or something like that, and they just had to quickly get some things done. Mm-hmm. It hasn't gone in this early before, and I think earlier guests of the day have spoken to this, I guess. But this is almost certainly because they want this in and out of the way before the Tory leadership. It doesn't. It allows them to eliminate a platform, an early platform for whoever the leader is. Mm-hmm. Traditionally, what's happened is the leadership has happened in the middle of a legislative session, and then in comes the leader, and there's all kinds of media coverage and hoopla around the leader's first day. That obviously will not happen. They also did a throne speech today, which didn't really say a lot. But
they prorogued the last session, and then had a speech from the throne this afternoon. And just to my question earlier, have they often started the throne speech by recognizing that we are on the traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq people? Is that
no? That's a fairly new thing, and you're seeing that more and more in municipal councils and everywhere, and that's fine. I mean that has become sort of a tradition. That's not a bad thing. I think it goes a long way towards reconciliation. However, there is the issue about a throne speech, which is originally a throne speech happened after an election or when you finished everything you set out to do in your mandate and needed to restart. So the question becomes, when you have a throne speech a year in, because they would have had one last year, and they did have one last year. Yep. When you have a throne speech a year in, you are effectively saying either we finished everything we said we were going to do, which obviously is not the case, or you are sending the message we need a restart, because a proroguing and a throne speech really is a restart. And you gotta. I think that's bad optics for government, and I thought it was bad optics when the NDP did it and the Tories did it. It's a little bit silly. It's also expensive, but that's a less of an issue because it's one day. But
we have to go to about halfway through it in order to hear any conversation about, the first part of the speech was about here's
what we've done.
Here are the people who have succeeded. Here are the people who we've lost. Here are the successes that the province has seen. And then it gets about halfway through the speech. Every Nova Scotian deserves timely access to primary health care. That was an election promise 6 years ago. And it's a government priority to ensure that it happens. So that it took that long in the speech to get to here's what we intend to do. Healthcare needs are changing, says the speech, and we must adapt. Our healthcare system needs to reflect how new doctors want to practice and what is sustainable in the long term. I had an opportunity to speak with Eddie Orrell, the progressive conservative health critic, earlier in the week, a Cape Breton MLA, someone who says, it's not fair. The hospitals are closing in his jurisdiction when people can't get health care. And the conservatives who were hosting their healthcare rally last night said, we as a party don't want to sit as government sits, we don't want to, just watch as government sits idly by. But I don't think it's a fair comment to say government's doing nothing, that government is not taking any steps towards it. It may not be the same steps the Conservatives would take. It may not be the approach the NDP would take. But to say they're doing nothing, I think kind of feeds into this whole...
It is unfair. And there was criticism of them holding a healthcare rally yesterday in Dartmouth. And I think that criticism was warranted in that we need a nonpartisan approach to this. Obviously, the government is doing something. Randy Delory is in there, and I'm sure that this keeps him up at night, if only because it's a political nightmare. Even if you don't believe that Randy and the Premier care about the issue, from an ethical point of view, you got to believe they care about it from a political point of view. Yeah. But this is not a simple problem to fix. Now, the problem is, and you saw this in the throne speech, there was no plan for how you're going to solve this. And we really haven't heard a plan. You have not heard a plan from the Tories. You have not heard a plan from the NDP. And the reason you haven't heard those plans is because nobody really knows what to do because the electorate and Nova Scotians are looking for a solution tomorrow because they don't have a doctor.
We all want a simple solution to a complex problem.
And that's what's going on. So politically, you need a solution that solves the problem tomorrow. This is a problem that, we can argue things that have exacerbated it under different governments, including this government. But this problem goes back decades in terms of people not foreseeing it. I mean, I can remember being in meetings where people would say, well, there isn't a healthcare primary physician problem in Metro. Well, guess what? There is. And those of us who were in Metro saw that coming. But nobody believed there was one there. So they thought the solution was only allow people to practice in rural areas. Doctors left. You now have doctors who understandably are being overworked in certain areas and are saying, hey, listen, I'm going to have to leave because I'm overworked. They almost had another crisis on their hands with the Saudi doctors. And we'll see where that pans out now. But,
right.
I mean, that wasn't of their own making, but you can imagine what that would have done to orthopedics and so forth.
I certainly heard people from within the system were saying this could create even more waits, expand the wait time that people are already waiting beyond the national average. We're like we're at the bottom of the list.
We're at the I mean, you can go online and look at the independent data, and we're not in good shape in really any of the categories, but I mean, there's certain categories we're doing particularly poorly in.
Andrew Younger's in our studio. He's a former member of government and an independent MLA, just so we put everything on the table. I want to make sure we're clear on
listen, it doesn't matter who you get in, they're going to...
Everybody's got a bias.
Somebody's going to say they have a bias, and I would, and people can take it or leave it. I try to look at things pretty neutrally as much as I can. Obviously, I have the benefit of having some information that other people wouldn't necessarily have from being in there, but my opinion's my opinion, and it's not any more or less valuable than anybody else's.
We're going to come back in just a few seconds with Andrew because somewhat critical people were of a progressive conservative health rally the day before the legislature opens. The Nova Scotia Health Authority is now looking for someone who was in charge of a person to replace Lynn Harrigan, who was Vice President of Medicine and Integrated Care. The question is, did she jump or was she pushed?
Well, she left suddenly.
We'll talk a little bit about that with Andrew right after this. All right, down the home stretch. This is Thursday, September 6th. It's the live version of our podcast on the radio on News 95.7. I find that funny, the whole idea that this is the live version of our podcast. I just say that to make fun.
Yeah, that's a little bit odd.
Yeah, we do podcasts. There is a podcast. You can listen to it later, but this is the radio version.
So you can download and listen to us over and over and over again.
If you're so inclined, absolutely.
Oh.
Today I learned. So the Nova Scotia Health, this is a story John McPhee wrote for the Chronicle Herald. We've got Andrew Younger in our studio. That's not a part of this story, but this
I was going to say, I made it into a story in the Chronicle Herald.
We want to
exciting.
talk a little bit about his reaction as the health authority will shake up its doctor recruitment strategy. A number of people doubt doctors, as we know, in this province. And there's a comment saying the next step in furthering our strategy involves taking a look at our structure, infrastructure, and resources. This is all in reaction to the fact that Lynn Harrigan, Vice President of Medicine and Integrated Care with the Nova Scotia Health Authority, is gone, is leaving. So what does this perhaps suggest? Is this, rather timely, given the legislative session about to happen? Happened on Tuesday after the long weekend, and people wondering, where did this come from? Was she pushed? Did she jump? Was this part of a life's plan? I don't know if there's been a whole lot of comment about this.
Well, it does sound like it was sudden. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean there's anything nefarious to it. It could be as simple as she took the summer and decided, hey, you know what, I can retire now, and I'm going to retire. It could also be that they're planning to take it in a direction that she just wasn't on board with and thought about it and left or was asked to leave. But this is the problem in positions like this. Secrecy doesn't help. Listen, and I've been there, right? Like, I have experienced the fact that sitting there and saying nothing can actually be worse for you. So I know that from personal experience, but I can tell you, when you look at groups like the health authority or government, or, we've talked about Amira before, they have this bias towards being closed and not telling people things.
The default position is to say nothing.
That's right. And this hurts them. And I think this is a case where it does, because the question is this immediately begs the question as whether there's infighting over the direction of the health authority, which there may be. And that's a perfectly fine reason for someone to say, you know what, I'm not on board with that direction. That's okay, I'm going to leave. There's nothing wrong with somebody taking that position, but that she's been around a long time. She's well respected from everything I've heard. I've had some interactions with her, and she always seemed to have the best care at mind. But maybe there is the other alternative here, that she's just tired of taking the blame for something that she doesn't have as much control over as people may like to believe she does. She can't make doctors come out of thin air.
Well, and this is not an inherent Nova Scotian problem. There are doctor shortages across.
And this is the problem Nova Scotia has, is that, I have friends who are highly qualified doctors from Nova Scotia, and they had offers made to them in Alberta and in the States that were many times the amount of money for many less hours than they would have got here. And at a certain point for their families, it's like they had to take that. And so if it was just Nova Scotia, we could try and recruit people from other jurisdictions. But what we've run into now is that there are few jurisdictions anywhere in North America, at least, that are not desperately trying to recruit doctors. And so it's become a bit of a bidding war. And Nova Scotia will never win in the bidding war.
And with that in mind, it's much more likely you'll have a doctor who wants to relocate within an hour of Halifax than in, say, Cape Breton or Digby or Yarmouth or even in the Valley. And
that's one of the things that, the NDP government was largely involved in this, although other governments on the tail ends of this did this, was, Digby was a major issue, and they brought forward some nurse practitioners. And that did help. I mean, did it solve the problem? No. But it did take some of the pressure off, and especially in some of these rural areas. And one of the things you have when you look at the population in the province is we are depopulating in many of our rural communities. There's a lot of reasons for that. But that makes it even harder to attract many doctors. So we need to, talk to the guy whose name's going to escape me, a Tarek, who has Peace by Chocolate, and say, what is it that attracts you to that region? Because when we look at immigrants and immigrant doctors, maybe we need to understand what is the kind of person or attraction that is going to attract someone to stay there and settle. My brother's a family doctor. We grew up in the city. He chose to locate in Truro because he wanted to be in a rural area. Well, that's in part because he married somebody from a rural area.
Right, and there's so many life influences that will dictate where we end up. Yeah. Just before we go, I did, obviously the House is back in session, and we'll see what business comes of in reaction to the throne speech today. But there was a CRA, a Corporate Research Associates poll, says that, the gap between the Liberals and the PCs is narrowing, but Stephen McNeil is still the preference for Premier of Nova Scotia. Any of that surprising?
That's not surprising at all. First of all, nobody knows who the leader of the PCs is at the moment. So, it's very hard in a leaderless party. If anybody put money on it would be, Tim or Cecil is probably going to be the leader, but anything can happen. The other thing is that they haven't distinguished themselves as standing for anything. I mean, if you love or hate Steve McNeil, you know exactly what his position is on things.
He's been consistent.
He's been consistent, and you know what his sort of political philosophy is. And as I say, doesn't matter if you love or hate it. Neither of the other parties have really distinguished themselves or shown what they exactly stand for. And I think that some of the federal Tory stuff is really scaring some people, especially in Metro, as it pertains to the provincial PCs. And you may even see them have a little bit more difficulty in some of their Metro seats, even some of the ones they have now in the next election.
We expecting a pretty uneventful fall sitting?
Oh, yeah, nothing's going to happen in this session. I mean, the biggest thing will be the Traffic Safety Act, and I think that is one to watch, especially if you are a pedestrian or a cyclist, because the consultation happened very, very quickly on that for an act of that size. So that is an act where crossed T's and dotted I's could make a big difference in the meaning of clauses. And if they're proposing major changes in how traffic works in the province, that's going to be the thing. The fireworks are going to be over education and healthcare in question period.
As they always are.
But I can't imagine any legislation the government would be bringing forward on that. There really isn't any labor issues that they need to address by legislation. So I think you're going to see them in and out pretty quick.
Well, as we say, thank you for helping us on today's show, trying to keep the tone a little bit more positive, and I think we've done that.
We always try.
Always try. Andrew Younger, it's a treat to get you back in the studio. Thank you so much.
Always happy to be here. Thanks.
All right. And producer Matt, that's it for us today. Thank you for all you do. Appreciate it.
I was going to start yelling and try to bring the good feeling down, but I won't do that.
Well, I'm glad for that. Well, there's always tomorrow. All right. All News Afternoons next. The wheel gets spinning in just a few moments, and we'll be back here on the show for our program starting tomorrow at 12:30. We'll see you then.